Have you ever been publicly shamed by someone you once loved? Isabel Hart knew that pain all too well. At a lavish gala, her ex-husband, the brilliant Dr. Aris Thorne, paraded his pregnant mistress, leaving Isabel to face a storm of whispers and pity. He thought he had won, that he had broken her. But Isabel was holding a secret of her own, a truth so powerful it would not only shatter Aris's perfect new world, but redefine everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the woman he so carelessly threw away. What was her secret? The ballroom of the St. Regis sparkled with a cruel, knowing light, the kind that magnifies every flaw and amplifies every whisper. For Isabel Hart, it felt like standing in a house of mirrors, each reflection a distorted, more broken version of herself. It had been a year since the divorce, a year of meticulously rebuilding the shattered architecture of her life, and tonight was meant to be her unveiling. Not as Aris Thorne's discarded wife, but as Isabel Hart, the new head of acquisitions for Caldwell and Finch Publishing, a woman who had found her footing on the shifting sands of betrayal. She clutched her crystal-beaded purse, the cold gems digging into her palm, a small, sharp pain that anchored her to the present. Her dress, a column of midnight blue silk, was a suit of armor she'd spent a month's salary on. It was meant to make her feel powerful, untouchable. But the moment she saw him, the armor felt as fragile as spun sugar. Dr. Aris Thorne, her ex-husband, stood near the grand staircase, a king in his court. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon, a man whose hands were celebrated for their miraculous ability to mend broken hearts. Just not hers. He was effortlessly charming, his smile a carefully calibrated weapon, and tonight he was deploying it with lethal precision. But it wasn't his smile that made the air in Isabel's lungs turn to ice. It was the woman on his arm. Sophie Caldwell, younger, softer, with wide, innocent eyes that were anything but. She was the heiress to the Caldwell pharmaceutical empire, a name that carried weight and, as Isabel now saw, a certain roundness. Sophie was pregnant. The swell of her belly was unmistakable beneath the blush-pink satin of her gown. The realization hit Isabel with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a new relationship, it was a new life, a new family, built on the rubble of their own. The whispers started instantly, a ripple of venom spreading through the glittering crowd. "Did you see? That's his ex, Isabel. He certainly traded up, a fertile heiress for her. She looks devastated. Poor thing." Each word was a tiny shard of glass embedding itself in her skin. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She wanted to run, to dissolve into the shadows, but her feet were cemented to the plush carpet. Then, Aris saw her. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. Surprise? Guilt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cool, almost challenging gaze. He whispered something to Sophie, whose hand flew to her belly in a gesture of protective pride. Then they started walking towards her. It was a calculated move, a public execution. Every head in the ballroom turned. The string quartet seemed to quiet, the clinking of champagne flutes ceasing. Isabel was alone on an island, the tide of social scrutiny rushing in. "Isabel," Aris said, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel she knew all too well. "I'm surprised to see you here." "Aris," she managed, her own voice a stranger to her ears, thin and reedy. "It's a publishing event. I work in publishing now, remember?" "Ah, yes. Caldwell and Finch Publishing," he said, the name a deliberate twist of the knife. He gestured to the woman beside him. "You know my fiancée, Sophie Caldwell, of course." Sophie's smile was sickly sweet. "It's so lovely to see you again, Isabel. We're just so happy." She emphasized the we, her hand never leaving the gentle curve of her stomach. The diamond on her finger was a blinding star, far larger than the one Aris had given Isabel. "I can see that," Isabel said, her gaze fixed on that triumphant hand. "Congratulations." The word felt like swallowing dust. Aris's expression was one of smug satisfaction. This was what he wanted. He wanted to show everyone that he had moved on, that he had won. He wanted to humiliate her, to erase the 5 years they had shared, as if they were nothing more than a regrettable first draft. "Yes, we're expecting a boy," Aris announced, his voice booming with a theatrical pride that was clearly intended for the audience now shamelessly eavesdropping. "A little heir to carry on the Thorn name, something I've wanted for a very long time." The barb was aimed directly at her heart, and it found its mark. Their struggles with fertility had been a silent, painful battle. A landscape of dashed hopes and clinical disappointments that had eroded the very foundation of their marriage. He had always made her feel like she was the one who was lacking, the one who was broken. Tears pricked the back of her eyes, hot and furious. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She would not cry. She would not crumble. She lifted her chin, meeting his cold gray eyes with a fire she didn't know she possessed. "An heir," she repeated, her voice suddenly clear and steady. "How wonderful for you, Aris." She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. In that quiet space, she saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He had expected tears, a scene, a retreat. He had not expected this unnerving calm. She then turned her attention to Sophie, offering a small, enigmatic smile. "And you, Sophie. You must be thrilled. I wish you all the best." Without waiting for a response, Isabel turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high. She could feel his stare, could feel the confused murmur of the crowd. She didn't look back. She walked through the sea of faces, past the pity and the judgment, and didn't stop until she was outside, the cool night air a balm on her burning skin. She hailed a cab, her composure holding until the moment the door clicked shut. Then, and only then, did she allow a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage. He thought he had broken her. He thought he had the final word. He paraded his new life, his heir, thinking it was the ultimate victory. But Aris Thorn, for all his brilliance, was a fool. He had no idea about the secret she carried, the one she had guarded for over a year. A secret that, when revealed, would not just level his carefully constructed kingdom, but leave him utterly and irrevocably speechless. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The taxi ride back to her apartment was a blur of streetlights and shadows, each one a fleeting image of her past with Aris, the Upper East Side brownstone they had shared, now his and Sophie's, the small Italian restaurant where he'd proposed, the park where they used to walk their golden retriever, a dog he'd insisted on keeping. Each memory was now tainted, a photograph burned at the edges by the night's events. Isabel's apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in Greenwich Village, was her sanctuary. It was the first place that was truly hers. Filled with books from floor to ceiling, mismatched furniture from flea markets, and the lingering scent of lavender and old paper. It was a world away from the sterile minimalist perfection Aris had demanded in their home. She dropped her purse on a worn armchair and kicked off her heels, the relief immediate and profound. The midnight blue dress, her armor, now felt like a cage. She unzipped it, letting it pool at her feet, and padded into her bedroom in her slip. The first thing she did was walk to the small antique rocking horse that stood in the corner. It was a beautiful thing, carved from dark cherry wood, its painted eyes full of gentle wisdom. She had found it at a dusty antique shop upstate, a relic of a bygone era, and had restored it herself, sanding down the rough edges and restaining the wood until it shone with a soft luster. Her fingers traced the smooth curve of its mane. This room, this apartment, this life. It was all built around a ghost, a tiny, perfect ghost she had never been able to hold. The humiliation at the gala was a fresh wound, but it lay on top of an older, deeper one. Eris's final cruel pronouncement about his heir had been a deliberate reopening of that wound. He knew exactly where to cut. Their journey through infertility had been a lonely one, made lonelier by Eris's clinical detachment. For him, it was a medical problem to be solved, a failure of biology. For Isabel, it was a profound, soul-crushing grief. He saw it as a series of procedures and statistics. She saw it as a series of lost dreams. He grew impatient, then resentful. He started staying out late, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his scrubs. The diagnosis of unexplained infertility became his excuse to look elsewhere, to find a solution that didn't involve her. The divorce papers had been served on the 2nd anniversary of their last failed IVF cycle. The cruelty of the timing was not lost on her. Now, standing in her quiet bedroom, the silence was broken by a soft coo from the other room. It was a sound that both healed and broke her heart a little more each day. She walked into the small adjoining room, a space that was once a walk-in closet, now transformed. The walls were painted a soft, buttery yellow. A mobile of hand-stitched felt stars and moons hung from the ceiling. In the center of the room, in a simple white crib, lay her secret. Noah. He was 13 months old, a perfect, beautiful boy with a tuft of dark, curly hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Aris's eyes. He was stirring in his sleep, his little rosebud mouth making sucking motions. Isabel's secret wasn't a new lover or a hidden fortune. It was a child. Eris's child. Their child. Her hand instinctively went to her locket, a simple silver oval she never took off. Inside wasn't a picture, but a tiny folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from the fertility clinic, dated a month before Eris had left her. It was for the final storage payment for their remaining embryos, the ones Aris had told her he'd instructed the clinic to destroy. He had lied. In his haste to start his new life with Sophie, he had been sloppy. He had signed the consent form for destruction, but had never followed up, never paid the final disposal fee. The clinic, bound by protocol, had sent Isabel a final notice. Her name was on the account, too, after all. She had stared at that notice for a week, a maelstrom of anger, grief, and a wild, defiant hope swirling inside her. He had discarded their potential children as easily as he had discarded her. But he hadn't succeeded. A part of them, a tiny, frozen possibility, still existed. The decision had been terrifying, a leap of faith into an unknown future. She had used the last of her savings, the money she'd set aside for a down payment on a small bookstore she'd dreamed of owning, and had gone through with the transfer. Alone. 9 months later, Noah was born. He was the product of their last, most viable embryo, a perfect, healthy baby boy. Her son. She had told no one. Her family lived across the country, and she had spun a story of a whirlwind romance with a man who wasn't ready for fatherhood. It was a flimsy shield, but it was enough. The world thought she was a single mother by choice. No one suspected the truth. Noah stirred again, his eyes fluttering open. He saw her, and a gummy, heart-stopping smile spread across his face. He lifted his chubby arms towards her. "Mama," he babbled, a sound that was music to her ears. Isabel lifted him from the crib, his warmth and weight a solid, reassuring presence in her arms. He smelled of milk and baby powder, the scent of pure innocence. She buried her face in his soft curls, inhaling the scent of him, the scent of her salvation. "Hello, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you have a good sleep?" She carried him to the rocking chair, settling into the familiar rhythm. This was their ritual. This was the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage. A life of quiet moments, of lullabies whispered in the dark, of a love so fierce and protective it eclipsed everything else. The man at the gala, the cruel stranger with her husband's face, felt a million miles away. His public humiliation, his pregnant mistress, his grand pronouncements, they were nothing compared to this. The solid weight of her son in her arms. Eris thought he was building a legacy with Sophie Caldwell. He was so proud of his heir. The irony was so thick, so bitter, it was almost comical. He was searching for something he had already created and thrown away. She looked down at Noah, now drifting back to sleep against her chest. He had Oris's strong jawline, his dark hair, but he had her smile. He was a perfect blend of them, a living, breathing testament to a love that Eris had tried to erase. For a year, she had been content with her secret. Her motivation hadn't been revenge. It had been survival. She had needed to heal, to become a mother on her own terms, away from the toxic shadow of her ex-husband. But tonight, something had shifted. Seeing him, so smug and cruel, so confident in his victory, had ignited a spark of anger she hadn't realized she was suppressing. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Noah. Her son deserved to be acknowledged. He deserved more than to be a secret, a ghost in the narrative Eris was so carefully crafting. She didn't know how or when, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eris Thorne was going to learn the truth. And when he did, his world would never be the same. She rocked her son gently, a silent promise echoing in the quiet room. The lullaby she hummed was soft, but it was the prelude to a storm. The week after the gala was a study in controlled chaos. At Caldwell and Finch Publishing, Isabel threw herself into her work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. She was negotiating a multi-book deal with a Pulitzer-winning historian, a major coup that would solidify her position and prove she was more than just a name on a list of pity-inspiring divorcees. The work was a balm, a place where her intellect and ambition were valued, a world away from the domestic battlefield she had just fled. Her colleagues were tactfully silent about the gossip that had undoubtedly slithered its way from the gala into the publishing world's inner circles. They treated her with a gentle, almost reverent respect, a testament to the reputation she was building. But she saw the curious glances, the softened voices. She was a story, a tragic heroine. It made her skin crawl. But while her days were a whirlwind of contracts and manuscripts, her nights were for planning. The anger that had crystallized in the back of that taxi had not dissipated. It had sharpened, honed itself into a clear, cold purpose. Revenge was too simple a word for what she wanted. It was about correction. It was about truth. She knew she couldn't just storm into Eris's office with a birth certificate and a baby. He was a master manipulator, a man who could twist any narrative to his advantage. He would paint her as unstable, hysterical, a scorned ex-wife seeking to ruin his newfound happiness. He would use his wealth and influence to bury her. No, the reveal had to be strategic. It had to be undeniable. It had to be on her terms. Her first move was small, a single pebble dropped into the still, murky waters of Oris's life. She reactivated her old, dormant social media accounts. During her marriage, Oris had discouraged her from having a public presence. He'd called it unbecoming for a surgeon's wife. Now, she understood he simply wanted to control the narrative, to keep her isolated. She didn't post photos of Noah. Not yet. Instead, she began to curate a new identity. She posted about her work at Caldwell and Finch, photos of galley proofs and literary events. She shared articles about single mothers, about women thriving after divorce, about the quiet strength of rebuilding a life from scratch. She was crafting a story, her story, one of resilience and independence. Then she made her second move. She called her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Joanna Price, who had handled her divorce. "Joanna, it's Isabel Hart. Isabel, I heard about the gala. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Joanna said, her voice warm with genuine sympathy. Thank you, but I'm not calling for sympathy, Isabel said, her tone firm. I'm calling for information. I need you to find out everything you can about the Thorne-Caldwell prenuptial agreement. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's a fortress, Isabel. The Caldwells are notoriously private, but I have my sources. Why the sudden interest? Isabel hesitated, the secret a heavy weight on her tongue. She trusted Joanna, but she wasn't ready to share everything yet. Let's just say Aris made some pronouncements at the gala about his future heir. I have a feeling his financial arrangements with the Caldwells might be tied to that. An heir clause, Joanna mused, the interest in her voice piqued. It's archaic, but with old money families like the Caldwells, it's not unheard of. They'd want to ensure the family fortune passes to a legitimate, biological heir. It protects the bloodline, so to speak. I'll see what I can dig up. Discreetly, of course. Thank you, Joanna. That's exactly what I need. Her third move was the most difficult, the one that required her to step back into the world she had so eagerly fled. She needed an ally, someone who had a foot in both her old life and her new one. She needed Maya. Maya had been her best friend since college, a fiercely loyal, brilliantly funny art curator who had been her rock during the divorce. But Maya was also friends with Aris's sister, Lydia Hale. It was a tangled, complicated web, and Isabel had been careful to keep Maya and Noah separate, not wanting to put her friend in an impossible position. But now, she needed her. She invited Maya over for dinner, cooking her favorite pasta dish, the apartment filled with the comforting aroma of garlic and basil. She watched as Maya cooed over Noah, who was now confidently toddling around the living room, a trail of wooden blocks in his wake. He's just perfect, Isabel, Maya said, her eyes shining as she watched him. He has your smile, but my God, those eyes are pure thorn. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. You think so? Are you kidding? They're heiresses. It's uncanny. Maya looked up, her expression softening. It must be so hard, seeing him in your son every day. Isabel took a deep breath. It was time. That's what I need to talk to you about, May. She told her everything. The lie Aris told about the embryos, the notice from the clinic, the secret pregnancy, the birth of Noah. She watched as Maya's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to a slow-burning fury on her behalf. That son of a bitch, Maya whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped her wine glass. That absolute arrogant son of a bitch. He left you, told you he destroyed your last chance at a family, and then this. He just left a part of you, of both of you, in a freezer? He didn't think I'd find out, Isabel said, a bitter taste in her mouth. He was careless. He underestimated me. He always did, Maya said, her eyes flashing. So, the gala, that whole performance with the pregnant Barbie, it was all a lie. He's celebrating an heir when his firstborn son is right here, living in a walk-up in the village. The sheer, staggering hypocrisy of it hung in the air between them. What are you going to do? Maya asked, her voice low. I'm going to correct the record, Isabel said. But I need to be smart about it. He'll fight me, Maya. He'll try to destroy me, which is where you come in. She explained her plan, the need for information, for an inside perspective. She needed to know what Aris was saying, how the Caldwell family was reacting, the whispers behind the closed doors of their elite circle. Maya didn't hesitate. Lydia's having a baby shower for Sophie next month, a ridiculously over-the-top affair at the plaza. I'm invited. I'll be your eyes and ears. I'll find out everything. Her loyalty was a shield, and Isabel felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought her to tears. The final piece of her plan fell into place a week later. It was a package delivered by courier to her office. Inside was a single, sleek, black USB drive and a note from a private investigator she had hired, a man who specialized in digging up the digital ghosts of the wealthy. The note was simple. The files you requested. He was as careless with his data as he was with everything else. Isabel plugged the drive into her laptop, her heart pounding. It contained archived text messages and emails from Aris's accounts, recovered from old cloud backups he had forgotten to delete. It was a long shot, but she was hoping for a single thread. She spent hours scrolling through years of mundane conversations, dinner plans, and medical jargon. And then she found it. An email chain between Aris and his lawyer from 18 months ago, 2 months before he'd left her. The subject line was, Marital Asset Division. She read through the legal jargon, her eyes scanning for one thing. And there it was, a single, damning sentence in an email from Aris. And to be clear, I want all cryopreserved materials from the fertility clinic destroyed. I want a clean break. No loose ends. This is non-negotiable. It was the proof, the undeniable black and white proof that he had not just forgotten or been careless. He had given a direct, explicit order to erase their potential children. He had lied to her face, telling her he'd taken care of it, when in reality, he had simply walked away, assuming the clinic would handle his dirty work. But the most damning part was the date. He was already planning the divorce, already consulting lawyers, already talking about clean breaks, while she was still injecting herself with hormones, still hoping for a miracle, still believing they were in it together. The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole her breath. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a desecration of the most sacred, vulnerable part of their life together. She saved the email, her hands trembling. This was the weapon. Not just the existence of Noah, but the proof of Aris's intent, the proof of his lie. She looked out her office window, the Manhattan skyline stretching out before her. The city lights seemed to glitter with a new, sharper promise. The ripple she had started was about to become a wave, and it was heading straight for Dr. Aris Thorne. The baby shower for Sophie Caldwell was exactly as Maya had predicted, a symphony of pastel excess. Held in a private suite at the Plaza Hotel, the room was suffocating in peonies and hydrangeas, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and entitlement. Women with surgically perfected faces and heirloom jewels pecked at macarons and spoke in hushed, conspiratorial tones. It was a piranha tank disguised as a tea party. Maya moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a seasoned diplomat, her artist's eye taking in every detail. She offered congratulations to Sophie, who was enthroned on a white velvet armchair, a beatific smile plastered on her face as she unwrapped an endless succession of cashmere onesies and silver rattles. Lydia Hale, Aris's younger sister, fluttered about, playing the gracious hostess. Maya had always found Lydia to be the most approachable of the Thornes, possessing a warmth that her brother sorely lacked. She cornered her near the champagne fountain, offering a non-alcoholic version, of course. "Lydia, you look radiant. Hosting suits you," Maya began, her tone light and breezy. "Maya, I'm so glad you could make it," Lydia gushed. "Isn't this just wonderful? Aris is on cloud 9. He's finally getting the family he's always dreamed of." The phrase, so similar to the one Aris had used at the gala, sent a chill down Maya's spine. It was the party line. "He seems incredibly happy," Maya agreed, fishing. "It all happened so fast, though. I mean, the divorce from Isabel, and now this. It's a whirlwind." Lydia's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Well, sometimes you just know. And Sophie is uncomplicated. She's exactly what Aris needs. What our family needs." She glanced towards the Caldwell matriarch, a formidable woman with diamonds at her throat and eyes like chips of ice, holding court in the corner. "The merger of our two families is a blessing for everyone." Merger. The word was so cold, so clinical. This wasn't a romance. It was a corporate takeover. "And Isabel?" Maya asked, feigning casual curiosity. "Has anyone heard from her? I feel so awful for her, seeing all this splashed everywhere." Lydia sighed, a theatrical display of pity. I know. It's a terrible situation. Eris feels dreadful about how it all played out, of course. But Isabel, she was always so intense, so emotional. Their struggles, it took a toll on him. He needed to move on, to find some peace. It was the Thorne narrative, polished and perfected. Isabel was the unstable, emotional wreck. Eris was the long-suffering husband who had finally found his serene, uncomplicated harbor. Maya had to resist the urge to throw her non-alcoholic champagne in Lydia's perfectly made-up face. Later, Maya managed to get close to the Caldwell inner circle, pretending to admire a particularly ostentatious diaper cake. She listened as Sophie's mother, Margaret Caldwell, spoke to a friend. "The prenup is ironclad, of course," Margaret said, her voice a low, confident hum. "But the heir clause was my insistence. The Thorne name is respectable, but our fortune must be protected. It passes to Eris and Sophie's direct biological issue. No outside claims, no complications." Bingo. Joanna had been right. The entire arrangement, the merger, hinged on the baby currently being celebrated. Sophie wasn't just a fiancé, she was a vessel for a billion-dollar inheritance. Maya relayed all of this to Isabel that evening, the two of them huddled in Isabel's cozy living room while Noah slept peacefully in his crib. "So it's true," Isabel said, the pieces clicking into place. "His entire future with the Caldwells is contingent on that baby." "It's worse than that," Maya said, her eyes dark. "The way they talk about you, Isabel, they've painted you as this fragile, hysterical woman who couldn't give him a child, and he's the hero who escaped. He's not just erasing you, he's rewriting your entire history together." The injustice of it was a physical weight in Isabel's chest. The years of shared hope, the quiet grief, the endless medical procedures, all of it twisted into a narrative where she was the villain, the failure. But the information Maya had gathered was invaluable. It gave her a target. The foundation of Eris's new life was the legitimacy of his heir. And that foundation was built on a lie of omission. The next day, Isabel put the second phase of her own whisper campaign into motion. It started with a single anonymous email sent from an encrypted service to a notorious gossip columnist who covered the Manhattan elite. The email was short and tantalizing. Subject: The Thorne Miracle Baby. One has to wonder about the immaculate timing of the Thorne Caldwell heir. Dr. Eris Thorne and his ex-wife, Isabel Hart, famously struggled with infertility for years. Now, mere months after their divorce, his new heiress fiancée is pregnant. Is Dr. Thorne's virility suddenly restored? Or is there more to this story? Perhaps someone should look into the records at the city's top fertility clinics. Some secrets are frozen, just waiting to be thawed. It was a breadcrumb, a tiny morsel of insinuation. But in the voracious world of high society gossip, it was a feast. Simultaneously, Isabel began to subtly change her social media presence. She posted a picture of the antique rocking horse in her bedroom. The caption was simple: "Sometimes, the things we restore from the past bring the most joy to our present." Then a picture of a stack of children's books on her nightstand. Research for a new project, or maybe just for me. They were just whispers, hints of a life that didn't align with the tragic, childless narrative the Thornes were peddling. It was just enough to make people wonder. The first sign that the campaign was working came from Joanna Price. "I got a strange call today," her lawyer said over the phone. "From Richard Hale, Eris's father." Isabel sat up straighter. Richard Hale was the patriarch, a retired titan of industry, a man who valued reputation and control above all else. "He was fishing," Joanna continued. "He said he was reviewing some old family trusts and wanted to confirm the details of your divorce settlement. Specifically, he asked if there were any outstanding biological assets." Isabel's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "I told him that all finalized assets were outlined in the divorce decree and that I couldn't discuss any confidential details." But Isabel, he was spooked. Someone has been whispering in his ear. The gossip column had run a blind item, a thinly veiled piece about a celebrated surgeon and his miraculous new heir, questioning the convenient timing. It was enough to rattle the old guard. Richard Hale would not tolerate a scandal, especially one that could jeopardize the Caldwell merger. The pressure was building. Aris, cocooned in his new life, was likely oblivious, but his family was not. They were starting to ask questions. The final, and most crucial, part of her plan was Noah's upcoming DNA test. It was a simple at-home kit, but the results, certified by a lab, would be her silver bullet, the proof that would make all the whispers a verifiable roar. She swabbed the inside of Noah's cheek while he slept, his little face a picture of innocence. It felt like a betrayal of his peace, but it was a necessary evil. She was doing this to protect him, to give him the legacy he was entitled to, a legacy his father had tried to deny him. She sealed the sample and sent it off. A prayer whispered over the package. A few days later, Maya called, her voice breathless with excitement. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "I had lunch with Lydia, and she was a wreck. She said Eris and Sophie had a massive fight." "About what?" Isabel asked, her heart hammering. "About you," Maya said. "Sophie saw your social media posts, the rocking horse, the books. She accused Aris of still being attached to you. She's insecure, Isabel, and paranoid. She asked him point blank if there was any chance you could have a claim on him, on them. He, of course, laughed it off, called her hormonal. But the seed has been planted. The whisper has reached the inner sanctum." Isabel closed her eyes, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was working. The fortress Aris had built around himself was beginning to show cracks. His uncomplicated life was about to get very, very complicated. The whispers were growing louder, and soon they would be impossible to ignore. Aris Thorne prided himself on his control. In the operating room, he was a god, orchestrating a delicate ballet of life and death with unflappable precision. His world was one of sterile fields, predictable outcomes, and absolute authority. He had applied the same principles to his personal life, excising Isabel like a diseased tissue and suturing Sophie into her place. It was a clean, successful procedure, or so he thought. The first tremor of doubt came not from a gossip column, but from his own father. Richard Hale had summoned him to his cavernous, wood-paneled study, a room that had always felt more like a courtroom than a family space. "There are rumors, Aris," Richard had said, his steepled fingers casting a long shadow across his mahogany desk. "Whispers about your divorce, about Isabel." "They're nothing," Aris had scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "The bitter ramblings of a scorned woman. She's posting cryptic nonsense on the internet. It's pathetic." "Pathetic women can still cause problems," Richard had countered, his eyes like chips of granite. "The Caldwells value discretion. Margaret called me this morning. She's concerned about this narrative Isabel seems to be building. The timing of Sophie's pregnancy is convenient. A convenience that could be misconstrued." "It's nobody's business," Aris snapped, his temper flaring. "When $1 billion fortune is at stake, it becomes everyone's business," his father retorted. "I spoke to your divorce lawyer. I asked about the embryos." Aris froze. The embryos. A loose end he thought he had tied up. "They were destroyed. I signed the form." "You signed a consent form," Richard corrected him, his voice dangerously low. "But did you confirm the action was carried out? Did you ensure the account was closed? Or did you, in your usual arrogant haste, simply assume it was done?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Aris couldn't answer. He hadn't checked. He had been so eager to wash his hands of Isabel, of their failed attempts, of that whole miserable chapter of his life, that he had just walked away. He had outsourced the emotional dirty work to a clinic, to a piece of paper. He left his father's house with a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. For the first time in a long time, he felt a prickle of uncertainty, a loss of control. The feeling intensified at home. Sophie, who had once been his calm harbor, was now a stormy sea of hormonal anxieties. She had seen Isabel's posts, had heard the whispers from her friends. "Why is she posting about rocking horses, Aris?" she had demanded, her eyes welling with tears. "Is she seeing someone? Does she have a baby? Are you hiding something from me?" "It's a cry for attention, that's all." He had soothed, stroking her hair, but his words felt hollow, even to himself. The image of the rocking horse, so unlike anything the minimalist Isabel he knew would own, was strangely unsettling. The unease festered, a low-grade infection in his otherwise perfect life. He found himself thinking about Isabel at odd moments. He remembered her quiet strength, her fierce intelligence, the way she could dissect a novel or a political argument with a clarity that both impressed and intimidated him. He had called her intense, emotional. Now he wondered if what he'd really meant was that she was challenging. Unlike Sophie, who agreed with everything he said, Isabel had pushed back, had forced him to be better. He had found it exhausting. Now he found Sophie's placid agreement boring. The breaking point came a week later. He was in his office at the hospital, reviewing patient files, when a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he slid open the envelope. Inside was a single document, a laboratory report, a DNA analysis. He read it once, then twice, the medical jargon swimming before his eyes. But the conclusion was stark, clinical, and undeniable. Participant 1. Noah Hale. Participant 2. Alleged father. Dr. Aris Thorne. Result: the probability of paternity is 99.9999%. Dr. Aris Thorne is not excluded as the biological father of the child, Noah Hale. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor. Noah Hale. A name, a child, a son. His son. The sterile white walls of his office seemed to close in on him. He couldn't breathe. The carefully constructed world he had built for himself, the prestigious job, the wealthy fiancé, the impending heir, crumbled to dust in an instant. It was all a lie, a grand, elaborate farce. He thought back to the gala, to his smug pronouncements, his cruel public humiliation of Isabel. He had stood there, boasting about his heir, while his true heir, his firstborn son, was hidden away. A secret she had kept for over a year. The sheer scale of her deception, of her quiet, patient revenge, was breathtaking. She had let him build his gilded cage, and then, with a single piece of paper, she had shown him that he was the one who was trapped. He stumbled out of his office, muttering an excuse to his bewildered secretary. He drove, not to his pristine townhouse and his pregnant fiancée, but to Greenwich Village. He didn't know her exact address, but he knew the neighborhood. It was where she had always wanted to live, full of the bookstores and cafes she loved. He found her building, a charming pre-war walk-up with overflowing flower boxes. He buzzed her apartment, his thumb pressing down on the button as if it were an emergency call. "Hello?" Her voice, cautious and wary, came through the intercom. "Isabel, it's me. We need to talk." There was a long silence. He could picture her on the other end, her mind racing. He had expected her to hang up, to deny him entry. But the buzzer sounded, a sharp, electric command. He pushed the door open and took the stairs, 2 at a time, his heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against his ribs. She was waiting for him at her open door. She was dressed in simple jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked different, calmer, stronger. There were no traces of the heartbroken woman from the gala. Her apartment was just as he had imagined, warm and cluttered and full of books, and in the center of the living room, standing unsteadily on his own 2 feet, holding onto the leg of a coffee table, was a little boy with a riot of dark, curly hair and his own gray eyes. Aris stopped dead in the doorway, the sight of the child stealing the air from his lungs. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a baby. The resemblance was absolute. undeniable. The boy looked at him with a child's open curiosity. No fear, no judgment. Then he smiled, a wide, gummy smile that was pure Isabel. Eris's legs gave out. He sank to his knees in the hallway, the world tilting on its axis. He had come here for a confrontation, for an explanation, for a fight. But all he could do was stare at the face of the son he had never known, the child he had ordered to be destroyed. "His name is Noah," Isabel said, her voice quiet but firm, with no hint of triumph, only a profound, unshakable certainty. Eris looked from the boy to her, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The full weight of his actions, of his lies and his cruelty, crashed down on him. He had thought he was the one in control, the one who had won. But he was the fool. He was the one who had lost everything that ever mattered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was, for the first time in his life, utterly and completely speechless. The silence in the apartment was a living thing, thick with unspoken accusations and the wreckage of a dozen lies. Eris remained on his knees in the doorway, a fallen king before a throne he didn't know existed. Noah, oblivious to the drama unfolding, let go of the coffee table and took a wobbly step towards the strange man in his hallway, his expression one of pure, unfiltered curiosity. Isabel watched the scene, her heart a tangled knot of emotions. There was a grim satisfaction. Yes, but it was overshadowed by a deep, aching sadness for the little boy who was staring at his father for the first time. This was not how it was supposed to be. "Get up, Eris," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're frightening him." Her words seemed to break the spell. Eris staggered to his feet, leaning against the doorframe for support. He couldn't take his eyes off Noah. "How?" he finally managed to whisper, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. "How could you do this? How did you keep this from me? How is he real?" "You should know how, Eris. You were there for the first part," Isabel said, a touch of ice in her tone. "As for the rest, you were careless. You signed a consent form but never followed through. The clinic contacted me before they would proceed with the disposal. They needed consent from both parties. Your loose end was still tied to me." The word disposal hung in the air, ugly and clinical. Eris flinched as if struck. "I thought—" he stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time she could remember. "I assumed they would just—" "You assumed?" She finished for him, her voice flat. "You assumed you could just sign a piece of paper and erase a part of our life, a part of me. You assumed I would just disappear. You assumed a lot of things, Eris." She bent down and scooped Noah into her arms, holding him close. The gesture was both maternal and defensive, a clear line drawn in the sand. This child was hers. Eris finally tore his gaze away from the boy and looked at her. Truly looked at her. He saw the strength in her jaw, the clarity in her eyes. The woman he had dismissed as emotional and intense had orchestrated this revelation with the precision of a surgeon. His surgeon. "Why, Isabel?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why keep him a secret for so long? Was this all just revenge? To wait for the perfect moment to destroy me?" Isabel laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. "Destroy you? Oh, Eris, you give yourself too much credit. And me, not nearly enough. This wasn't about you. Not at first. This was about me. It was about surviving you. Do you have any idea what it was like? Discovering I was pregnant a month after you left me? After you told me you had destroyed our last chance? I was alone. And terrified. And grieving the end of my marriage. The last thing I needed was your judgment, your control, your presence." She walked over to the window. Noah settled on her hip and looked out at the bustling street below. "I needed to do it on my own. I needed to become his mother without you telling me I was doing it wrong. I needed to build a life for us, a safe one, far away from the wreckage you created. So no, this wasn't about revenge. It was about sanctuary. But the gala, he insisted, his voice pleading. The DNA test. You sent it to me. You wanted me to know. You wanted to hurt me. Yes, she admitted, turning back to face him, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen since their early days. I did. Because at that gala, you didn't just introduce your new fiancé. You publicly shamed me for the one thing that almost broke me. My inability to give you a child. You stood there, so smug and proud, and you used our most private pain as a weapon to humiliate me. You made it about my failure, and I realized then that my silence was protecting you. It was allowing you to build this new life on a foundation of lies. And Noah, my son, he deserves more than that. He is not a dirty secret. He is not a loose end. He is your son. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his ego, his self-delusion, his carefully crafted narrative. He had no defense. She was right. He had been cruel, not just in his actions, but in his intent. He had wanted to hurt her, to prove to the world and to himself that leaving her was the right choice. The fight went out of him, replaced by a wave of shame so profound it made him feel sick. He sank onto the edge of a worn armchair, the one she'd dropped her purse on the night of the gala, and buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry, he mumbled into his palms. The words were inadequate, a pebble against an avalanche of wrongdoing, but they were all he had. Isabel, I am so sorry. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I was a coward. I was drowning, in the pressure from my family, in the disappointment, in my own failure. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't fix us, so I ran. And I blamed you, because it was easier than blaming myself. It was monstrous. It was the first time she had ever heard him admit to failure, to weakness. The confession, raw and unvarnished, cracked open something inside her. The hard shell of her anger began to soften, revealing the bruised heart beneath. Noah, sensing the shift in the emotional atmosphere, began to squirm in her arms, reaching a chubby hand out towards Aris. "Dada?" he said, the word a clumsy, hopeful question. He had heard the word in parks and on television, a sound without a face. Aris's head shot up, his face crumpled, the carefully maintained mask of the brilliant surgeon shattering completely. A sob escaped his throat, a raw, ragged sound of pure anguish. Isabel's own eyes filled with tears. This was the moment she had both dreaded and, in a secret corner of her heart, longed for. The collision of their two worlds, the past and the present, the lie and the truth. She carried Noah over to him, her movements slow and deliberate. She knelt in front of her ex-husband, the man who had broken her heart, and held out their son. "He's your son, Aris," she said softly. "He deserves to know his father." Aris looked from her face to the child's, his expression a mixture of terror and wonder. He slowly, hesitantly, reached out a hand, the same hand that had performed miracles on strangers, and gently touched Noah's cheek. The baby leaned into his touch, his skin soft and warm. In that moment, the war between them was over. The strategies, the whispers, the calculated revelations, they all fell away. All that was left was this small, sacred space, a quiet apartment in the village, where a man was meeting his son for the very first time, and a woman was watching the father of her child finally, truly, confess. The unraveling was complete. Now the question was what, if anything, could be rebuilt from the ruins. The news of Noah's existence hit the Thorne and Caldwell families like a seismic shockwave. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a full-throated scandal, detonated by Aris himself. After leaving Isabel's apartment, his world irrevocably altered. He had driven straight to his father's house. But this time, he didn't go to the courtroom study. He went to the family drawing room, where Richard Hale and his mother, Catherine, were having their evening sherry. Sophie and her mother, Margaret, were scheduled to join them for dinner. The merger was to be finalized. Aris walked in, his suit rumpled, his face pale and tear-streaked, and simply said, "I have a son." The confession that followed was brutal and unsparing. He omitted nothing. His lie about the embryos, his cruelty to Isabel, the DNA test, the meeting with his 1-year-old child. He took full ownership of the deceit, the cowardice, the staggering arrogance. Richard Hale, for the first time in Aris's memory, was silent. His face, usually a mask of stern control, was ashen. Catherine, a woman who communicated primarily through disappointed sighs, began to weep quietly into a silk handkerchief. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the Caldwells. It was Catherine who intercepted them at the door, her voice a low, urgent murmur. Aris could hear the muffled sounds of shock, of outrage. Then Margaret Caldwell stormed into the room, her face a thundercloud of fury. Sophie trailed behind her, her eyes wide with disbelief and betrayal. "Is this true?" Margaret demanded, her voice like cracking ice. She wasn't speaking to Aris, but to Richard. This was a deal gone wrong, a breach of contract between dynasties. "It is," Aris said, his voice hoarse. He turned to Sophie, whose hand was protectively on her own pregnant belly. "Sophie, there's no excuse. I lied to you, to everyone." Sophie stared at him, her fairy tale romance dissolving into a nightmare. "A son? You have a son? With her?" The word "her" was laced with a venom that surprised even Aris. "The heir clause in the prenuptial agreement is now null and void," Margaret announced, her voice ringing with finality. "This child, this outside complication predates your own. He is the Thorne heir. My daughter will not be party to this farce. The engagement is off. The wedding is cancelled. All arrangements are terminated." She was not just ending a relationship. She was scuttling a merger. She grabbed her daughter's arm, pulling her towards the door. "We're leaving." Sophie looked back at Aris, her face a mess of tears and fury. "You humiliated me," she sobbed. "You made me a fool." And then she was gone, the front door slamming shut with a sound that echoed the closing of a chapter in Aris's life. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next day, the gossip columns, which had previously only hinted and whispered, exploded with the full, sordid story. Anonymous sources, clearly from the Caldwell camp, painted Aris as a deceptive, manipulative monster. The narrative he had so carefully crafted of the heroic surgeon escaping his unstable ex-wife was shattered. Now, he was the villain, and Isabel was the wronged Madonna, secretly raising the true heir while her ex-husband flaunted his pregnant mistress. At the hospital, he was met with a wall of silence. Colleagues who had once clapped him on the back now avoided his gaze. His superiors called him into a meeting to discuss the reputational damage to the institution. He was a liability. He was put on an indefinite leave of absence. His world, once so solid and predictable, had been reduced to rubble. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. Meanwhile, Isabel found herself in the eye of a very different kind of storm. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, from talk shows, from publishers wanting to buy the rights to her incredible story of resilience. She ignored them all. She had not done this for fame or fortune. Her victory felt hollow. She had wanted to correct the record, to claim her son's identity. She had achieved that. But the public spectacle made her deeply uncomfortable. She saw the headlines, the pictures of a distraught Sophie, the stories painting Aris as a pariah. She had wanted to wound him, but she had not intended to destroy him. Her most surprising call came from Lydia Hale. I'm not calling to yell at you, Lydia said, her voice surprisingly gentle. I'm calling to apologize. On behalf of my family, on behalf of my brother. What he did to you, what we all believed. It was unforgivable. I saw the way he looked at you at that gala, Isabel, and I went along with it. I'm so ashamed. It's not your fault, Lydia, Isabel said, moved by her sincerity. It is. I should have known better. You were my friend, Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. Is the baby okay? His name is Noah, Isabel said softly, and he's perfect. I'd like to meet him someday, if you'd let me. He's my nephew. The request, so simple and heartfelt, was a crack of light in the darkness. This wasn't just about her and Oris anymore. It was about a family. A broken, messy, complicated family. But Noah's family, nonetheless. A few days later, Oris appeared at her door again. He looked like a ghost. He was thinner, his eyes were haunted, and he was dressed in jeans and a rumpled shirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood in the hallway, holding a large, clumsily wrapped gift. It's for him, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I know it's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I wanted to get him something. Isabel took the gift. It was a beautiful hand-carved wooden train set, the kind that costs a fortune in bespoke toy stores. It was a father's awkward, inadequate peace offering. Thank you, Aris, she said. I've lost everything, he said, looking at the floor. The job, Sophie, the respect of my family. I deserve it. I know that. But the only thing I can't bear losing is the chance to know him. My son. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, raw plea. Please, Isabel, don't shut me out. Let me be his father. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll follow any rules you set. I'll learn. Please. This was a new Aris, stripped of his arrogance, his pride, his power. All that was left was a broken man begging for a chance to be a father. Isabel looked at him, at the man who had caused her more pain than anyone in her life. And she thought of Noah, of his bright, curious eyes, so much like the man standing before her. Her son deserved a father. And maybe, just maybe, this broken man deserved a chance to become one. Okay, Aris, she said, her voice quiet but clear. We can try, but we do it my way, slowly, one step at a time. A single tear rolled down Aris's cheek, a tear not of grief, but of a fragile, terrifying hope. The fallout had been devastating, but in the wreckage, a single, tiny seed of possibility had been planted. The reconstruction of Aris Thorne began not with a grand gesture, but with a picture book. He arrived at Isabel's apartment for his first scheduled visit with Noah, looking as nervous as a first-year medical student on his first day of rounds. He brought with him a copy of Goodnight Moon, its cover already slightly bent from his anxious grip. Isabel set the ground rules with a calm, quiet authority. You can come twice a week, for 1 hour. I'll be here the whole time. We'll start with you just playing with him, reading to him. We'll see how it goes. It was excruciatingly awkward at first. Aris, the man who could command an entire operating theater, seemed to have no idea what to do with a 1-year-old. He sat stiffly on the floor, trying to engage Noah with the wooden train set he'd bought. Noah, for his part, was more interested in chewing on the box. Isabel watched from the armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She felt a strange mix of pity and resentment. This was the man who had desperately wanted an heir, yet he had no idea how to simply be with a child. But Aris persisted. He came every Tuesday and Thursday, on time, every time. He slowly learned to unbend, to get down on the floor and make silly noises. He learned that Noah loved it when he made the train whistle, and that he would giggle uncontrollably if Aris pretended to sneeze every time a block tower fell over. He started reading Goodnight Moon at the end of each visit. His deep, resonant voice, once used to deliver devastating diagnoses, now murmuring about a quiet old lady whispering, "Hush." One evening, Noah, who had been sitting in Isabel's lap, crawled over to Eris and fell asleep against his chest. Eris froze, looking at Isabel with wide, terrified, and utterly joyous eyes. She just nodded, a small smile touching her lips. It was a tiny breakthrough, a fragile bridge being built between father and son. He began to talk to Isabel during these visits, not about them, but about Noah. "He has a new tooth coming in," he'd say, a note of wonder in his voice. "Did you see the way he figured out how to stack the red block on the blue one?" He was discovering his son, and in doing so, he was discovering a part of himself he never knew existed. He also started therapy, something the old Eris would have scoffed at. He told Isabel about it one evening, as he was packing up to leave. "My therapist says I have a pathological need for control," he said, not looking at her. "He says I see people as problems to be managed, not as people." He's right. It was another confession, another crack in the armor. The world outside Isabel's cozy apartment continued to spin. Sophie Caldwell gave birth to a baby girl. The announcement was quiet, a stark contrast to the lavish baby shower. There was no mention of Eris. The Caldwell dynasty had closed ranks, protecting their own. Eris sent a gift, a silver locket, but received no acknowledgement. The door to that life was firmly, irrevocably closed. His leave of absence from the hospital became permanent. The board had mutually agreed. It was for the best. The great Dr. Thorne, the surgical prodigy, was unemployed. He started volunteering at a free clinic in the Bronx, a world away from the gleaming private suites he was used to. He was humbled, stripped of his prestige. And for the first time, he was doing the work not for the glory, but simply to help people. As the months passed, the visits with Noah grew longer. The 1 hour stretched to 2, then to an entire afternoon. Isabel found herself relaxing, the constant need for vigilance slowly receding. She saw the genuine change in Eris. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. The impatience was gone, replaced by a deep well of patience she never thought he possessed. One Saturday, he took them to the zoo. It was their first outing as a trio. Eris carried Noah on his shoulders, pointing out the monkeys and the seals, his face alight with a simple, uncomplicated joy. Isabel watched them, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. They looked like a family. Later, as they sat on a bench eating ice cream, Noah had more of it on his face than in his mouth. Eris turned to her. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. "About how I used our pain as a weapon, how I blamed you for my own feelings of failure." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I was terrified. Not of not having a child, but of what it meant about me. I've always been the best, the one who succeeds. And I couldn't succeed at this. I couldn't fix it. And I hated myself for it. So I hated you instead, because it was easier." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes clear and full of a pain she recognized as her own. "It wasn't your failure, Isabel. It was mine. I failed you. I failed us. And I am so sorry." The apology was different this time. It wasn't the desperate plea of a broken man. It was the quiet, considered confession of a man who had finally faced his own demons. Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. But for the first time, they weren't tears of anger or grief. They were tears of release. A weight she hadn't even realized she was still carrying lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you for saying that, Eris," she whispered. The reconstruction was slow, painstaking work. It was building a new structure on a foundation of ruins. But for the first time, they were building it together. Not as husband and wife, but as two people bound by a shared love for a little boy, and a shared history they were finally beginning to understand. The past could not be erased, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be redeemed. A year after Eris had fallen to his knees in her doorway, Isabel stood in a small, sun-drenched storefront in her Greenwich Village neighborhood. The scent of fresh paint and new books hung in the air. Large windows looked out onto the bustling street, and in the corner, near a brightly colored reading rug, stood a beautifully restored cherry wood rocking horse. This was her dream, realized. The next chapter. The sign above the door read. It was a children's bookstore, a haven of stories and imagination she had built with the money from a settlement Aris had insisted upon. It wasn't alimony. He had called it restitution. He had liquidated several of his assets and given her a sum that was far more than any court would have awarded. "This is for Noah," he had said, "and for the dream I almost cost you." The opening day was a quiet affair, just friends and neighbors. Maya was there, arranging copies of Where the Wild Things Are, and beaming with pride. Lydia, now a regular presence in their lives, was there with her own toddler, who was happily sharing a cookie with Noah. They were a strange, cobbled-together family, but a family nonetheless. Aris arrived late, looking nervous. He was no longer the slick, celebrated surgeon. He was a man who worked at a community clinic, who drove a sensible sedan, and whose pockets were often filled with small, forgotten toys. He had found a new purpose, a quieter, more authentic one. He was, Isabel had to admit, a better man than the one she had married. He handed her a small wrapped gift. "A housewarming present," he said with a shy smile. She unwrapped it to find a first edition of The Velveteen Rabbit, her favorite childhood book. Tucked inside was a note. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." He had underlined the last sentence. Tears sprang to her eyes. It was a perfect gift, a perfect sentiment. They had both been so carefully kept, so full of sharp edges, but life and love and loss had worn them down, made them shabby, and in the process had made them real. Later, after the last guest had left, Eris helped her clean up. Noah was asleep in his stroller, worn out from the excitement. "You did it, Isabel," he said, looking around the beautiful, peaceful store. "You built this. It's amazing." "We built it," she corrected him softly. "Your support, it made it possible." They stood in a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. "I've been thinking," Eris said, breaking the quiet, "about us." Isabel's heart did a little flip, a nervous flutter she hadn't felt in a long time. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he continued, his gaze steady and earnest. "And I know that what we had before, it wasn't real. Not in the ways that mattered. It was built on expectations, on pressures, on who we thought we were supposed to be. But this, what we have now, co-parenting Noah, being friends, this feels real." He took a hesitant step closer. "I'm not the man I was, Isabel. And you are not the woman I left. We've both been through a fire. And I know this might be crazy, but I'm still in love with you. No, that's not right. I'm in love with the woman you are now. And I was wondering if maybe someday you might be willing to see if there's a next chapter for us too." He didn't try to touch her. He just stood there, his heart open, his hope fragile, leaving the choice entirely, completely, up to her. Isabel looked at him, at this new, humbled, authentic man. She thought of their journey, of the pain and the betrayal, but also of the forgiveness and the grace. She thought of their son, the living embodiment of their shared history. The old love was gone, burned away in the fire of his betrayal. But in its place, something new had begun to grow. Something quieter, stronger, rooted not in illusion, but in a shared, hard-won reality. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it would never be perfect. It would be messy and complicated and real. She thought of the rocking horse in the corner, the thing from the past she had restored, the thing that had brought so much joy to her present. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Maybe," she said, her voice full of a hope she hadn't dared to feel before. "Maybe we can start with coffee and see what story we write next." It wasn't a yes, not yet. But it was a beginning. It was a promise of a future built not on ambition or pride, but on the steady, resilient, and authentic beating of two hearts that had been broken and had, against all odds, begun to heal. What a journey of resilience and the incredible power of truth. Isabel's story shows us that, even in our darkest moments, when we feel most humiliated and broken, we have the strength to rewrite our own narratives. It's a powerful reminder that true victory isn't about revenge, but about living authentically and fighting for the life you and your loved ones deserve. The most profound connections are often the ones we have to rebuild from the ground up, based on honesty and forgiveness. If Isabel's story of strength and unexpected twists moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need this message of hope. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic and inspiring stories every week. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.